It started with a scream that cut through the thin walls of a small trailer in Satsuma, Florida, a sound sharp enough to snap a family awake and pull neighbors from their sleep. By the time anyone reached the doorway of the room where 5-year-old Haleigh Cummings had been tucked into bed hours earlier, the space was empty except for a blanket left twisted near the mattress and a cinder block propping open a back door that should not have been open at all. In the early morning hours of February 10, 2009, Ronald Cummings rushed home from his overnight shift after getting a frantic call from his girlfriend, Misty Croslin. She told him she had woken up to find the child gone. Ronald stepped into the trailer and saw what deputies later documented. No signs of forced entry except for the door held open from the outside, no overturned furniture, and no clear struggle. The only thing missing was a small girl who should have been asleep. Deputies from the Putnam County Sheriff's Office arrived minutes later. They searched the trailer, then widened their sweep to the yard, the road, and the woods beyond. Flashlights moved through palmetto and pine, while dogs traced overlapping scent lines that vanished near a dirt road leading toward the St. Johns River. Volunteers and officers formed search grids that stretched for miles, but daylight brought no sign of her. The focus shifted back to the adults inside the home, and every inconsistency became pressure. Investigators questioned Misty first because she was the last adult known to have seen Haleigh. Her story changed from interview to interview. At one point, she said she had stayed awake all night. Later, she said she had been asleep and didn't hear anything. She mentioned washing blankets, then denied it. She suggested intruders, then said she didn't know what happened. Detectives watched her closely, noting how her tone shifted each time new details emerged in the press. Ronald, emotional and furious, insisted someone had taken his daughter and pointed toward people he believed might have held grudges against him. None of those leads held. For weeks, the search continued with divers moving through the dark water of local ponds and officers combing abandoned trailers. Traces of physical evidence were limited, and every promising tip collapsed. The case became a tangle of interviews, call logs, and contradictory statements. The more investigators pressed the adults around Haleigh, the more the story bent instead of sharpening. By spring, pressure mounted on Misty and members of her extended family. Rumors spread that she had not been at the trailer the night of the disappearance, despite her claims. People familiar with her movements suggested she had been out using drugs with relatives. When deputies confronted her, she shifted again, telling investigators she had been home the entire night but had been too frightened to admit details earlier. Detectives knew they were listening to someone hiding something, but they could not prove what. More months passed, and every major search effort ended the same way. No trace of the child. In 2010, a major shift in the investigation occurred, but not because of a breakthrough. Instead, several of the adults connected to the case, including Misty, Ronald, and members of Misty's family, were arrested and convicted in a large-scale drug trafficking operation. While in custody, they spoke repeatedly with investigators about the disappearance. Each conversation added new claims. None matched. At one point, a cousin described an argument that supposedly escalated into violence, followed by a panicked cover-up. Another person suggested the child had accidentally drowned and that her body had been hidden in the woods. Deputies followed every version, digging in rural ponds, searching wooded ravines, and scanning riverbanks with sonar. All of it ended in dead ends and retracted statements. Detectives determined that some of the information had been offered in hopes of leniency on drug charges, and the case slid back into uncertainty. Years went by. Ronald stayed in contact with law enforcement from prison, insisting he had no role in his daughter's disappearance and repeatedly urging investigators to keep searching. Misty, also behind bars, shifted her statements again, telling different versions depending on who asked. None of her claims held up when checked against records, phone data, or physical evidence. The community around Satsuma never forgot the case. Candlelight vigils continued each year, with posters of Haleigh taped to folding tables and volunteers handing out flyers that had grown weathered from sunlight and time. Detectives attended many of those events, standing off to the side, answering quiet questions from neighbors who still hoped for a resolution. The sheriff's office re-examined evidence periodically, bringing in new investigators to look at the case with fresh eyes. Each team circled the same problem. The timeline inside the trailer had never been reliably established. Investigators revisited alibis, rechecked phone records, and re-interviewed witnesses who had moved across the state. Some remembered new details. Others said their memories had faded or blurred. Deputies brought cadaver dogs back to locations that had been searched years earlier, hoping that shifts in landscape or water levels might reveal something. Nothing did. Detectives also examined the possibility of a stranger abduction, but there was no reliable sighting, no suspicious vehicle, and no forensic evidence to support it. As time passed, the working theory inside the sheriff's office shifted toward the likelihood that someone close to the child knew far more than they had admitted. Detectives believed fear, loyalty, or criminal involvement may have kept key details hidden. They reviewed jail calls, letters, and recorded conversations, listening for slips that might point to a hidden truth. Some statements hinted at guilt, others at regret, but none were clear enough to act on. Investigators also noted how the smallest details from that night remained unresolved. Neighbors reported seeing lights on at unusual hours, yet none could say whether they had heard a vehicle on the loose gravel road behind the trailer. A relative mentioned receiving a late phone call from someone tied to the household, but the timing conflicted with earlier statements. Detectives tracked every inconsistency, building timelines that overlapped and contradicted one another. They believed the real sequence of events had been buried under years of fear, misdirection, and shifting alliances, leaving the truth just out of reach. Despite the arrests, the shifting accounts, and the years of searching, Haleigh Cummings was never found. Her file remained open, evidence stored, interviews logged, and every new tip documented. Behind all of it was the same unanswered question that had hung in the air since the moment the trailer door was found held open in the darkness. What happened to the little girl who vanished while everyone else slept? Thank you for listening to The Lantern's Tale. Subscribe for more true stories, if you dare.